All right, thanks so much, Lori. All right, so good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on which time zone you're in. Before we get started, I do just want to talk a little bit about myself and give a little bit of my background. So my name's Caleb Funk. I'm one of the team managers on the manufacturing team with IMAGINiT. And I go back with IMAGINiT about 20 years now, worked with a lot of different tools along the way, and it's been interesting to see how things go along. Originally, there was this big push for we're moving from 2D to 3D, and then it was 3D, and now we need to manage this data. And the big question we get, it just seems like it's a recurring theme, is the idea of being able to tie data together. And that means a lot of different things. That could mean we've got data in the Vault that we need to push somewhere else. It could mean we've got data in an ERP system we want to pull down to the Vault. Just a variety of different ways that we may need to connect that. So part of the idea of closing the loop, Autodesk, if you look on their website, they have a product offering called Vault PLM. It's actually two different products. So what happens is there's the Vault Professional tool, and then there's the PLM tool, which is Fusion Lifecycle. And the idea is how those connect together, and that's part of what we're going to talk about as we go and take a look at this. So again, a little bit about me. Started out with IMAGINiT about 20 years ago, spent a lot of time with these different products. And this is the ones I've been working with most recently, is the data management tools and the Fusion Lifecycle tools. So with IMAGINiT, if you're not familiar with us, we're a division of RAM Worldwide, one of the world's largest providers of technology solutions. And I liked how that phrasing went. Kudos to marketing for that, because it's, there was the idea, oh, you sell CAD, and we absolutely do, but the idea of technology solutions becomes a big part of it. I've worked with a lot of different companies, and CAD is definitely a part of that, but it's not always the complete answer to it in all the pieces. We have over 400 employees across North America. We're an Autodesk Platinum partner, and we have different specializations. So I mentioned that I'm on the manufacturing side, and that's where I spend most of my time and where my specialization comes in. But we have people who specialize on the architecture, with the architecture tools. We have people who specialize with the design and manufacturing, which is me, but also construction, government. And even though I'm not a specialist in it, I'm talking about it today, but we do have a whole team dedicated to Fusion Lifecycle, which is Autodesk PLM tool. So these aren't hard and strict lines. They blur quite a bit as we talk, when we deal with clients who need a particular solution. It's very nice to have nearly 400 other people that I can call on and say, hey, what makes sense here? What's the best way to put this into place? So those specializations are there, but we definitely can reach across the aisle, reach across the room, and get someone else who specializes in something else and begin working with them. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is this idea of closing the loop. And I want to make sure, before we get too far into it, kind of what I'm even talking about with this idea. So if we take a look at the tools that we have here, and there's this idea of Vault PLM, and like I said, it's two different tools, and I'll get a little deeper into this, but the idea is there's going to be a hosted environment. So you have your server, your location, it is set up, and that's Autodesk and AutoCAD feeding into Vault. So with Vault, we've got this integrated CAD environment. It's integrated right into CAD. We can bring CAD files directly across to that. We've got local files, so we've got great performance when we're, pulling files out of the Vault, checking them in, checking them out. And Vault is the best support for Autodesk products for CAD, period. It's just absolutely, there's other tools out there for data management, but really this is the best one when we're dealing with Autodesk products. Software release typically matches our CAD tool. So if we're on 2021 Vault, we're in 2021 Inventor. And that is where we're creating all of this engineering data. And so this is how I came up. I was very much in the design detail area, creating this information. I didn't give a whole lot of thought to what happened beyond that. Well, this is where that is coming in. There's a whole cloud tool called Fusion Lifecycle. And this goes way beyond just engineering data. This goes into the idea of maybe suppliers, maybe tying further into an ERP. So it's PLM, and I'll discuss this in a moment, it's not an ERP system, but it's a PLM system. This is enterprise-wide. This goes across everybody. It's in the cloud, so you can easily get to it. You don't have to install software. You don't have to maintain software. And you can create processes in there that link things together. So those are kind of the two sides to Vault PLM. The idea of the Vault, hosted, integrated into CAD, and then in the cloud, we've got this Fusion lifecycle where we can go access that. Now, I'm throwing terms around. This gets confusing, and this is a lot of times one thing people ask me is, well, what are we really looking at here? So let's talk first here about PDM. And PDM is Product Data Management, and this is all about the engineering team. No matter how many people have access to our Vault or could possibly get into our Vault or anything like that, what we're really talking about is a strategy for the engineering team. Now, this is going to be managing data, and it could be releasing data and managing some other processes. But the thing to remember here, it's very much so within the engineering team. The whole reason we need PDM is because when we look at CAD files, particularly with Inventor, a little bit with AutoCAD, but particularly with Inventor, we have relationships between the files. So we have the idea of I've got an assembly, it's a master assembly, and it's made up of these sub-assemblies, and those sub-assemblies are made up of sub-assemblies, which are ultimately made up of all these parts. And we can see how that filters down. So those relationships, either you are going to maintain them, or you're going to leverage a software to maintain them. And the preference is to leverage that software to maintain them so you don't have to worry about, oh gosh, is that file in the right folder? Did I rename it? Whatever it's going to be. So relationships between the files is key. Controlling which users have access to particular files is key. It's another big piece of why we went to do this. Controlling revisions of files and controlling versions of files. So that is another big piece of this. Then PDM is all about CAD files. It's really what it's about. And it's about the idea of making sure the right person has the right file and controlling their access to those. So that's what that's about. CAD files, how they link together, who can get them. Well, then we've got this other tool, PLM. And this isn't going to replace the CAD tools that we have. And that's key. We don't go through and say, oh, it's one or the other. Realistically, it's going to be a mix. So PLM, instead of being about files, it's going to be about processes. Data is a part of it, but it's really about connecting data to people and processes. And now we're not talking engineering, we're talking the entire organization. So a particular, if I'm building that front end loader, that's not something that's going to happen just in engineering. I've got people that are going to require things over in purchasing. I've got people that are going to require things over in quality. I've got, when we get down, we're going to have manuals that go with it. We're going to need on the production line access to the bill of material, whatever it may be. So the idea is we want to connect those pieces together. So PLM, there's not one product called PLM. It's really a strategy. The concept has been around for a while. Autodesk specifically has Fusion Lifecycle that works with these ideas. So these, as we're taking a look, we've got process information, lifecycle information, whether something is production A, production B, work in progress, whatever it's going to be. And we want that to be enterprise-wide where we can pull in multiple people. So we're really looking at PLM having configurable workflows to be able to manage a business process, revision control over items and products. PLM is all about products. And then being able to extend data outside of engineering. So PDM is CAD files, PLM goes outside of that. We're going to marry those together. I do want to point out that everyone is doing PLM even if they don't have a PLM system. This is really common to where we've got something that kind of looks like this slide I'm going to bring up, where we basically, we've got some emails going around, some spreadsheets, we're sending things in attachments, we're re-entering information. The idea is we're just kind of tossing it over the wall is always what I hear, and it's pretty apt. You know, you get that email like, hey, this is all done. You know, here's an export from Inventor, send. And there's not a whole lot of connection and discussion. It's easy to get lost in there. I would say the most common PLM tool is Microsoft Excel. I've seen just so much of the types of things we can do in PLM just held in Excel. Well, the goal ultimately would be to take these workflows and then make them a little more connected, where we're able to have an order that starts in an order that starts in Fusion. Messed it up again. An order that starts in PLM Lifecycle. And it starts out here in Fusion Lifecycle. That becomes a project in Vault, which has a folder. So then we go through and we begin working on the parts, assemblies, and drawings. We push that information over to back to Fusion Lifecycle. Fusion Lifecycle can take that information and review it with production and pre-production. If there's any changes that need to be made, those can be sent back to be updated. If we can take this all the way out to quality, and if there's an issue with quality, it's going to push that back. So this would be a great place to get to, where we start something in Fusion Lifecycle and we can push it right back into other tools that we have and begin to push this information back and forth. So what we want to do is we're going to I want to talk about some use cases of how we're going to do this. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a middleware to connect Vault and Fusion Lifecycle. So that's if you take one thing away from this, even if you buy Vault PLM, you're getting two different products, and we're going to use a middleware to connect those two different products. And that's really a key to how this works. There's a lot of things that we can connect. I want to talk about some specific areas of just kind of common use cases of how we would do this. So one would be the idea of we would start a project in Fusion Lifecycle. The project moves to a particular phase, the development phase, right? We need to start building the things around this. So we need to start CAD development, and folders would automatically be created in Vault where those files are supposed to go. I like that one because it's so simple. It's really understandable. I'm creating a project. It creates a folder in Vault. From there, we would release the files. So this is something where we would want the bill of material and the possibly some viewables to be pushed over to Vault, from Vault to Fusion. I'm trying to keep my areas right here. I'll explain this on another slide where it makes more sense. So first we go one way, we can go the other. Another idea would be, what if we get to quality and something fails? And if we realize that we have a test and it fails, we need a nonconformance report. That nonconformance report gives us a design, there's a design problem, so that nonconformance report opens an ECO. That ECO in Fusion can move Vault files to work in progress. People get notified, we update the files, and we push them back. Now, before I go any further, I will say a lot of times when I'm doing one of these, if you've ever seen one of my webcasts before, a lot of times I'll be jumping into software and digging in. I won't do that nearly as much this time. This is going to be more conceptual. So much of this happens in the background, kind of through a middleware. There's nothing to show hardly. So it's kind of strange, but I will point out a few things as we go along. So let's take a look at how we would connect these technologies. I want to talk about that a little bit with some of these use cases. So this slide kind of shows all the possible use cases connected together. This is our fully connected workflow. I'm going to break this down a little bit, but I want to point out that how to look at this diagram is Vault, my hosted Vault environment is over there on the left, and Fusion Lifecycle is over there on the right. And in the middle, we have a middleware that pushes this information one direction or the other. So that's going to either pull from Vault or pull from Fusion Lifecycle to create the different things. I'm going to break down each case and just kind of talk through each case here for a moment with what we're looking at. So the first case I described was a project would start in Fusion Lifecycle. And that project information, once we reach a certain state, and that state you can determine, once we reach that state, it would automatically create a folder in Vault, linking that project information together. It would then be up to the user to populate it with the drawings, the assemblies, and the parts that go along with it. So once we have a stage gate over in Fusion, it creates a project folder in Vault. And that component is going to go through, and it's going to go through those different stages. For those of you, I'm just going to pull up my Fusion lifecycle here real quickly. I just want to point it out for people who haven't seen it. You know, I'm talking about this conceptually. I'm talking about some of these ideas. I just want to pull this up. Fusion Lifecycle has a lot of different components and a lot of different areas to it. And one of the big ones, one of the most common ones that people work with is the idea of program management and new product introductions. So when a new product comes along, a lot of times it's not going to be as simple as considering something like, oh, hey, we should draw a new one of those. There's going to be all kinds of investigation plans, planning. You know, before we ever draw a CAD file, there's going to be a lot of discussion, milestones, all of these different pieces in here. So Fusion Lifecycle allows me to track that information, kind of see where we're at, and I can even include key milestones that I can have. And here, when we take a look, I'll pull up my milestones. You can see that I'm behind on one by, wow, 12,000 days. That's not good. 1,200 days. So yeah, that's pretty common for me to have something in the red. It's a little more than I prefer. And I've got one coming up in 3 days that's giving me a yellow warning. So these stage gates are all here. Right now, engineering may not even be involved unless we're just letting them know what's going on. This is all investigation. You know, can the market bear it? Should we try this? What do we think? All of those kinds of things. And then this actually has a series of changes that it goes through. Those gates are tied to each of these. So we can move it in, we can approve it, you know, turn it off, turn it, you know, determine what we want to do with it. And the idea behind this is, once I reach a certain stage, I would then want that project to automatically create a folder in Vault. And there's a middleware that goes through and pulls that down and does it for me. Now, once I've created my files in Vault and created all of my information, I've created my assemblies, I've got certain different properties tied to them, I've got all of that, I want to release those files. And we have a release process. We have a change process in Fusion. The idea would be, I would set my state in Vault. The middleware would push the information, so the metadata and any viewables, up to Fusion. Once it's been reviewed and released, it would change the lifecycle state back in Inventor. So in this case, we have a full, this is going all the way around. We're creating something, pushing the metadata up to Fusion, taking that metadata, and then bringing it back over. So it's a complete round trip as we go through there. So this is pretty significant. This round trip, and this is probably one of the more common use cases that we would see. We have a lot of requests for things like this, where people would say, I want to push my bill of material information up, approve it, and then act on it in Vault. Now, one thing I will throw out there as well, I keep saying middleware, and I'm going to mention 2 specific middlewares here in a moment, just so you have an idea of what we're even talking about. But another piece of this is it is using the job processor in the background to do those kinds of changes. There's custom jobs that allow for us to make those kinds of changes and make those updates. So another thing that we could do is go through the idea of taking this information and creating non-conformance request, basically we would be reviewing the information that we would have, and then that would generate an ECO. So that's kind of a subset, but I will point this out. The way that that would work is we would have a ECO generated. That ECO would go through a state and then again affect my inventor files, affect my files that I have in Fusion Lifecycle. So we push this information back and forth between there. And I'll just pull up my Fusion here one more time because this is something that's kind of unusual. I have an entire, first of all, let's talk about quality. I can do non-conformance reports where I go through and take a particular component and take a look at it. Right now, I've got a non-conformance report on this particular bushing, and I can see the information. I'm dealing with a particular item. All of this gets pushed over from Vault. And then I can say, oh, I want to submit this for review. Once we hit a certain point, it goes back. Then I would come back and I would deal within here on change management, where I can put a change order against a component or series of components. And whatever those components are, whatever those affected items are, that gets pushed back over to Vault so that they get changed there. And we're using a middleware to keep all of that in place and keep that tied together. And I have a series of, I can take a look at my workflow. This is a really big thing. I can include workflow that's very complicated. One question I get asked a lot in Vault is how do we have, what can we do? What kind of workflows can we set up? Can we customize them? And typically the answer is no. Now I can do things with a change control board. I can have complicated workflows. I can have a, where everyone has to unanimously agree or not, just a whole series of these. So I just wanted to point that out, that what I'm defining is we've got these different areas and it can push between. But what it comes down to is middleware. So there's two middlewares that I will talk about. One is Cool Orange FLC Connect. And Cool Orange is a company we've done a lot of work with in the past. Autodesk has kind of put them out there as a preferred vendor for this type of thing to quickly be able to set this up. It's a fairly simple download. It installs directly into your Vault. It's a new area of configuration that you can set up. And there's things that we would set up. Creation and update of items and bills of materials in Fusion Lifecycle, initial releases, right, that we can have that, revision changes, those control boards I was talking about. If we, we can go through this whole series over here and step it back, and if it changes in one, it changes in both. So Cool Orange FLC Connect is a important, useful tool for this. This is something that realistically can be set up. It's a series of dialog boxes. It's pretty straightforward to establish the connection and begin determining when we hit a release state in Vault that triggers a bill of material push to this Fusion Lifecycle tenant. Those link together. Well, then we have another one called IMAGINiT Pulse. And Pulse is one that we have developed internally. This is something that we've been working with for quite some time. We saw a specific need for this, where we would want to be able to link together Fusion Lifecycle and Vault and have that information tied together. And if you look at the list, creating and updating items and bill of materials, initial release or fast track releases, revision releases, or typical change, CCB change control board releases. If you're paying attention, which I hope you are by this point, those are exactly the same things. I'm saying, look, there's two middlewares and they do very, very much the same thing. Well, why would I bring up both of them? I did want to break this down a little bit. So with Pulse and the Cool Orange FLC connector, with Cool Orange, it only goes Vault to FLC. So we really don't have, if there was another endpoint that we wanted to push this information to, That endpoint could be maybe an ERP system or almost anything. Anything with an API, Pulse can connect to it. The cool orange connector is very much connect Vault to FLC. That's it. We can do a lot more bidirectional things with Pulse than we can with FLC, with the cool orange connector. There are some things you can kind of do bidirectional. We can bring some information down, but the idea of true bidirectional properties, if I change it in one place, it changes in both, would only be true of Pulse. The other way, we would push information from Vault to Fusion Lifecycle. Now, because of that, how long does it take to implement it? Well, it really depends on complexity. Pulse is very much a two-order tool. We would work with, you're setting this up, we would work with you to say, well, what properties do you want to map? How do you want to connect this? What does that look like? And since Pulse can do so much of that, we would then have a project with that. You could get Cool Orange working, or I should say you, in conjunction with IMAGINiT, could get Cool Orange working in a couple of days. I mean, really, when I was setting it up and working with it just personally, it was just a couple of days to get it in place. However, because of that, with Pulse, we can customize it. There's a lot, we could create new workflows, we could tie new information together. With FLC, it can do 3 different things, and that's it. It's very, very much for that. Also, Pulse is cloud-based, where FLC has to have a dedicated state workstation for the job processor. It really relies on a job processor to do that. The different team, we would have to have our software development team customize it and set up for Pulse. PLM specialists can set up the other. So, what's the difference? Well, if you're looking for bidirectional properties, multiple endpoints, and custom workflows, you're really looking at Pulse. If you're looking to go through and have Vault, push Vault properties to Fusion Lifecycle, connect only to Fusion Lifecycle and no other particular tools. And if there's some concerns with that, you're looking at time, how long is this going to take to implement, budgetary concerns, and then the idea of the concept of, realistically, Fusion Lifecycle, some of that can be configured by an end user. There's things that we would be able to go in and set up and point to different folders because we've got different dialog boxes as opposed to code that's going to go in there. So these tools could absolutely be tied together. There's ways that we can tie this together. It's always going to be through a middleware. Which middleware is really the question that we have. So this is something I know often generates questions. There's a lot of discussion around this, and yeah, gosh, could we do this or could we work this way? So Lori, I think I would like to open it up to questions and see if anyone had any particular questions on the topic we're talking about.